The Phase 4 hype is back in full swing, and despite some people bemoaning the experience that Season of Discovery was, the hype is back. But I'd be amiss to not talk about the very large and visible elephant in the room, and that's Phase 3, and in the politest terms, the lackluster experience and vibe that it was. And being honest, Phase 3 was bad. It wasn't horrendous, it wasn't miserable, it wasn't terrible. It honestly wasn't even one of the worst experiences I've had in World of Warcraft. BFA, Shadowlands, Warlords of Draenor. Anyways, but it missed and fell short on a lot of key metrics that MMOs are defined by. Socializing, the gameplay loop, and the feeling of growth and rewards. And starting with something that broke all three of those tenets, we have Incursions. Perhaps the single most fumbled mechanic in Classic's history, though that might be Season of Mastery, honestly, but realistically, it's Incursions. And what they did to not just Season of Mastery, but people's thoughts and feelings on the entire Classic ecosystem. What was meant to be a unique and new fun way to level up and get gold and experience turned into the most gold-efficient, meta-defining way of playing Classic perhaps ever designed. And I will give the Classic devs one thing though, it was unique, it was new, and it was innovative. But the player base for the most part, and I do mean that most part a lot, cannot be left to be self-moderating. Because not one person likes the feeling of being left behind. And even if they don't really fall behind by not doing a particular system, the very thought and perception of being left behind is enough for most people to do the less fun, less innovative, less interesting system. And Incursions, they broke that equilibrium aggressively so, more than any other mechanic in the entire Classic ecosystem. It was the fastest way to level, it was the best gold farm, it had a very low skill ceiling, anybody could do it, and it was just across the board, the singular best thing you could do Season of Discovery's Phase 3. For gold, for XP, for your alts, just for leveling, just for playing, it was better than anything else. And it as a whole stopped a lot of people from questing in the open world or dungeon grinding. And I know, a lot of people are going to say, actually, and let me cut you right there. Sure, a decent chunk of people would have only, and I mean only, dungeon grinded from 40 to 50. But that still required more effort, more grouping, more conversation, more cohesiveness of a 5-person party than Incursions did. Most people might dungeon grind their first character to max level, but then the other characters, the alt, they would have quested, they would have grinded mobs, they would have done a myriad of other activities. Because dungeon grinding Zul'Farrak to 50 is not fun, and doing it the first time for efficiency, sure. I've done it before, a lot of people have done it before, but doing it on your alt, your third alt, your fifth alt? No, most people level up in other ways. And this is one of the major reasons why Phase 3 feels so empty, so lifeless. And there are plenty of other reasons to criticize Phase 3, mind you, but I don't fully blame the developers for this. Because we, as the player base, could choose not to do Incursions, we could choose not to do the least fun, most efficient way of playing. But as the bold man once said, if you give people the option of clicking a button that gives you 1 million gold, every single person is clicking that button, with no hesitation in fact. Some people might give you the moral argument of, I wouldn't do that because that would ruin the game. 99.9% of people would smack that button and then hit it as many times as humanely possible. And they would do that knowing it would break the game, knowing it would just kill off the entire progression and cohesion of the game. But that's just because that's what we as the players are now mentally conditioned to do. And as the gameplay loop of Incursion started to wear on people, people started to get bored. Efficiency in this particular goddamn case was definitely not fun, which then carried over into socializing and growth and rewards. Incursions completely negated the need to converse, to discuss, to find groups. Just rock up outside the dream portals, find a group and start running them. Turn them all in, finish, and then repeat. Someone gets left behind? Haha, fuck them, drop them and fill. Even if dungeons were just as mindless, you had to converse here or there and plan a little bit. Sure, all 5 of you might have just turned your brain off, but sometimes you'd have to say, hey wait, I gotta do a big pull here, or hey wait, we're gonna skip this. In Incursions, it's just run around the loop and again and again and again until everyone's done. And that's because socializing is a huge part of MMOs. And in Phase 3 in particular, it fell very short. Which then brings me on to growth and rewards. And the rewards from Incursions were top tier. You got your pre-bis gear, you got your 6-piece on, it was incredible, it was so rewarding. So much more so than perhaps any other activity in Season of Discovery's 3rd phase. In fact, the only comparable sources of loot were Sunken Temple and Wild Offerings. both which had their own problems, and I'll cover that later in the video though. So most people getting their pre-bis or nigh pre-bis with minimal effort, no hard work or activities, kind of numbs that part of the brain that gives you dopamine for being a good grind monkey. After all, what's the point of getting all those shiny little pixels if you just get it for showing up with no effort? You might as well Photoshop those pixels onto a picture of your own character at that point. But again, I need to clarify and I need to be very open about this to everyone. I love that the developers tried something new. Classic is an already fully fleshed out and figured game. Them trying something new is what I want from Season of Discovery. Maybe not what every single person wants, but experiencing new ways to play Classic in the world of Classic is what I personally want. Sure, I'd rather Classic Plus, but Season of Discovery was never meant to be Classic Plus. Season of Discovery is Season of Discovery. We're meant to go back to Azeroth in a kind of new, unique way. I know nobody asked for this, but it's still a fun game mode, even if Phase 3 has its problems. And they're clearly learning from their mistakes. They know that Incursions didn't land how they wanted them to, but guess what? From Incursions, we got instant world bosses in Phase 4. It's a small change from Phase 3 to Phase 4 that allows every single person to partake in world bosses, which previously belonged only to the most sweaty of sweats with summoning ults, people camping and waiting, Discord pings, and organization on a level that most casual players would never get together to organize. It's so sweaty that the one episode of South Park about WoW isn't that far off from reality. But I digress. Incursions were an absolute failure, but the technology and data that the team has gathered from it is a good thing and will absolutely benefit Phase 4 and onwards, and perhaps even further seasons. And talking about learning from their mistakes, we have the changes from 10-man to 20-man. Now, everybody knew this was coming. This wasn't some surprise. People knew you were going to have to eventually go from 10-man to 40-man with MC, Blackwing Lair, AQ, and Nax. But nobody really expected 10-man to 20-man from Noma to Sunken Temple. Instead, the player base had the 20-man raid size change dropped onto them, with essentially no warning. And this really shouldn't have been a big problem, but SOD's biggest draw was its casualness and the essential raw ease of access to the game. Being able to play with your small friend group and pug a stranger or two every now and then was something that a lot of people genuinely loved and enjoyed. So when they suddenly had to go from being a small and tight friend group that knew each other very personally to an actual proper guild, that's where things started to slip up for a lot of guilds and communities. That slip up though, that was forcing people to make friends in a massively multiplayer online game. That's right. But making friends wasn't the problem. It was forcing people to make friends that late into a content cycle. People expected it at level 60, not at level 40 and 50. In fact, if we had started with 20-man raid groups, I don't think a single person would have cared. Honestly, I think nobody would have even batted an eye at that. But forcing people to essentially expand their friend group dynamic on what they'd consider a random whim from the devs broke a lot of friend groups. This was quickly forgotten about because Phase 3 had a lot of other problems, but this was essentially the catalyst, the first problem that Phase 3 had. But at the time, nobody knew how big the problems would be. But you know what else is suffering? My subscriber count, so hit that goddamn subscribe button. But following the change from raid size groups, we have the new raid, Sunken Temple, which by all metrics should be considered an amazing raid, a great raid, but it isn't. It fell short on a lot of avenues. The biggest one? How goddamn long Phase 3 was. Had Phase 3 ended a month earlier, pretty much all the drama, all the problems, all the hatred around Phase 3 would have evaporated. People would have accepted it, it would have been a mid-phase, people would have been like, this wasn't great, and then moved on from their life. But lasting as long as it did, essentially 13 weeks, which honestly isn't even that long, because some phases in previous expansions lasted 13 goddamn months. Siege of Orgrimmar, Hellfire Citadel, just some of the raid tiers that lasted essentially a year. Sunken Temple though, oh man. Where do I even goddamn begin? From its dreary atmosphere, to its wonky launch, to the lackluster loot, to a car having 3 million health, which is double Ragnaros' health, mind you, to the raid itself just being overall packaged together in what I would consider a subpar situation. Now, on this point, I might be a teensy bit biased. Why am I biased, you ask? Well, I just hate Sunken Temple. I think it's a dog shit location. I've hated that place for 17 goddamn years. I hated it well before SOD was even a concept. I just hate the location. Whilst my hatred might be biased, the player base is not so much, because people dislike Sunken Temple after being left in here for so long. And honestly, being stuck here, held hostage in this drab-ass location was just really bad for my mental health. So let's discuss it in more detail. Not my mental health, that's for my therapist. Sunken Temple essentially launched to being disproportionately difficult, so hard in fact that had they not nerfed it, a majority of the classic player base would not have cleared it, because the classic player base is ass. because the whole shtick of Classic is easy content, easy gameplay. Anybody should be able to go into a Classic raid and clear it. I know, certain people struggle, certain people find the game hard, but Classic is not a hard game. The difficulty in Classic, the difficulty in Season of Discovery, heck, the difficulty in every version of Classic was getting 40 human beings together and making sure at least 20 of them were competent enough to carry the other 20. But they nerfed it, they dropped the difficulty, because as I said, Classic has always been about easy content, with the difficulty being organization and cohesion. So I won't touch on that one very long, except for one thing. I like the raid being hard at launch, and whilst I'm glad they nerfed it, I am glad they're carrying over some of that difficulty into the next phase with a new approach, heat level. Now, I'm not going to cover that in this video, because this video was talking about Phase 3. But Phase 4 is looking really good, and I'm sure it's going to bring up the hype, bring up people back, just make people happier again in general. Now though, if I had to describe the single biggest problem with Sunken Temple, I'd have to say it was the loot. It was, in comparison to Black Fathom Deeps and Noma, mid. It's not to say that the loot was bad, but it was meh. It wasn't enough of an upgrade, the damage increase was minimal, and our power growth was just middling. As much as it sucks to say, we're human, and seeing those little numbers become bigger and bigger, and the pixels become shinier and shinier, it's the main reason when people play MMOs. They want to feel like they're grinding to something that is an accomplishment. And Sunken Temple just missed that oomph factor to make most people want to grind it, which I will give the developers wasn't just later in the phase when they upgraded a whole bunch of the loot, bringing all these epics in, making things shinier, making people want to grind some more. Some may say it was too late though, and I won't disagree with that. It did come pretty late, but it was still addressed. And from the looks of it, they won't be making that mistake with Phase 4, with there being a lot of new items, a solid growth of power, and itemization just feeling better across the board, especially with all the new Tier 0, 0.5, and Tier 1, which honestly is a recurring theme with Phase 3. So many things fell through the cracks in Phase 3 that just make Phase 4 look amazing in comparison. Personally, I just think the Classic dev team was stretched thin between SOD, Cataclysm, and a whole bunch of back-end problems happening with Era and whatnot. I'm no developer, so I'm not going to speak to the difficulty of it, but I assume something about transferring everyone's data/characters over into Cataclysm required a lot more manpower than people may have realized. I think something broke in the back-end which made Cataclysm such a harder launch, because there was a lot of problems with Cataclysm's launch. Again, not covering that this video, Cataclysm is doing great. It's a phenomenal game mode. People are having a blast in Cataclysm as of this moment. But I think the biggest problem that Sunken Temple faced was that everything combined, on top of the already negative perception most people have for the place, combined with the trash, the atmosphere, the overall negative vibe for the entire phase, just week by week made people resent or hate Sunken Temple a lot more than it really deserved. And I just don't see that outlook changing at all. I'm not gonna lie to anybody. I'm pretty sure people might forget that Phase 3 sucked, but they will definitely not forget that Sunken Temple was ass. And talking about a grind that was ass, we have Maraudon and Wild Offering. What should have been a fun incentive to grind dungeons turned into a princess farm on steroids. That was honestly one of the singular least parts of Phase 3 for me. I got my dagger in the end, but that goddamn, I can't say the word I want to say about princess. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a stranger to a stupid grind, especially in Classic, but seeing Wild Offerings essentially become a fat shaming competition to see who could make princess crumble the fastest wasn't in my bingo for Season of Discovery. Now, the Wild Offering system itself isn't actually bad. It was a smart idea to add a currency that requires going into a dungeon to simulate and grow player engagement. Of course, the player base being the player base though ruined that plan for the developers, because everybody made sure to only grind in the most efficient way possible, aka killing princess over and over and over again. This is a side tangent, but shame on everybody doing dagger hard reserved runs. All of you are cancer. Cut that shit out. And thankfully the devs learned and listened, and in Phase 4 you simply get one currency per one boss kill. So if you want to grind every level 55 dungeon boss every day, go for it. For the average player, the new system is definitely funner and fairer, though I'm sure people are going to figure out an exploit, and I'm sure the exploit's going to get patched. As people like to say, exploit early, exploit often, because you're probably not going to get banned if you exploit. At least so long as it's within the rules and you're not cheating. And talking about people figuring things out pretty quickly, welcome to alts becoming less and less common. Not for any of the reasons you might actually expect. Alts were by and far easier to level than any time in Classic's history. Incursions were the most optimal and efficient XP farm, again, by a ginormous goddamn metric. So why did people stop leveling alts? It was because the content available to players, on top of having to do the rune grind over and over again, that made people stop playing their alts. They'd leveled them for sure, it was easy, but most people didn't even log into their mains, let alone their alt in Phase 3. This was a mild tragedy, as SOD started as this alt-friendly, casual game mode which made leveling and gearing alts progressively harder and harder. With each new phase, phase, it became less fun, just less enjoyable to level an alt and prepare it. Look, I'm not one to advocate for Classic becoming an easier game mode, but Classic's already easy, and forcing people to do a difficult, or at least in this case, boring grind isn't what most people would consider being just fun. So as runes became a hassle, and without a proper incentive to play those alt, the world started to become more and more barren. So phase 4, and again, recurring theme, it's adding skill book vendors so you can skip a portion of that grind, and Agron did say they were planning on adding easier way to get runes on your alt later on in phase 4. Not at launch, but they're fixing it and they're planning on addressing it. Phase 4 is just phase 3 fixed with way better content, honestly, if I just had to describe it in like one sentence. So as I was talking about the developers bringing forward good changes from phase 3 to phase 4, we have Stranglethorn Veil. It was a unique and fun event in phase 2, a nice innovation on phase 1's Ashen Veil event. But coming into phase 3, they nerfed the honor farm, which was one of the major reasons people grinded it in the first place. And on top of that, whilst the loot upgrades were decent, for most people it wasn't worth it. I can appreciate trying to bring player engagement back to the zone to keep PvP going, but the lack of a solid update to STV was just kind of a lackluster experience, I'm not gonna lie. People almost had an expectation that each phase would have a big PvP event, massive, bolstering, just huge and fun, like Ashen Veil to STV, and they assumed phase 3 would be the same. So not having that actually kinda sucked. Again, I'm not a developer or a coder, but I wonder how hard it would have been to just add some new troll NPCs, maybe add another boss, or you have Kadamu and then you have his brother Badamu, or whatever you want to call it, and just have them have different mechanics, maybe have the boss spawn a bunch of mini trolls you get to fight. There were just so many things they could have done that could have made STV Part 2 a funner experience for everybody involved. Even adding a few extra cosmetics, maybe add a new mount model you could grind towards, add a Kodo for everybody, add a skeletal steed, whatever have you. They could have done more to make people incentivized to grind in phase 3. And honestly, a small change like that would have been more than enough to make STV interesting enough for a whole new phase. I'm not going to lie to people. Or maybe the devs saw the metrics and data and realized that PvP events just don't cut it for most of the player base, and thus they cut their losses and moved their efforts into phase 4's Blackrock Eruption, which is a PvE focused event, and it looks really goddamn cool, with a nice little 3x honor gain inside the mountain itself to separate the PvEers and the PvPers, or let them both kinda co-mingle side by side, separate but together. Overall though, STV in phase 3 just wasn't it, and combined with Nightmare Incursions and Sunken Temple, it just brought the overall feeling of dread and hopelessness. One thing that I think many people overlook though is that the level 40 to 50 bracket is just not a good bracket for the player base to have been left in for so long. So close to 60 but being blue balled from our full potential, but also stronger than level 40 and just not really feeling it though. I think had we been left at level 60, players would not have minded nearly as much, but the overall location, the state of where we are as of this moment led to more and more Doomer vibes. And I'm absolutely not a Doomer. In fact, I've spent the past couple months being perhaps the biggest Blizzard shill in existence. I love Classic and I love SOD, and I'm just super incredibly utterly excited for its future. But I would be lying to say that I hadn't seen the massive drop off in players, or the rather negative player reception during this entire wait to phase 4. The very vibe of SOD has been Doomer meme intensified. Players log on to look around, mope a bit, grind incursions cause it's efficient, get some gold, log off and then play other things. Heck, if their guilds are still alive or around, they'll do their weekly Sunken Temple. But a lot of people's guilds as of this moment are essentially MIA. Or better yet, KIA. So, you know, there's not really much of a guild to play Sunken Temple with. And the very loss of hope is not something I've seen since Warlords, if I'm being honest. When I played Warlord back in the day, the Doomer-esque attitude was very loud and apparent, but people kept holding on to that faith till the selfie stick patch came out. I don't know if everybody remembers that. That shit was terrible. Goddamn people lost their goddamn minds when that happened. We waited how long for a selfie stick? And then when that selfie stick patch came out, my entire guild quit and I was left to play by myself. All sad and lonely. And Season of Discovery's phase 3 had that exact same vibe up until the very recent phase 4 announcement video. The hype is back in full force, my excitement is back, it's immeasurable. I can't wait to deep dive phase 4 and enjoy all the awesome content, all the awesome activities. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be super goddamn fun. Man, seeing such a broken player base, it's an interesting situation, and they blamed everyone and everything. And one of the biggest things they blamed was Cataclysm. In fact, if you had decided to curse your eyes with the Twitter, Reddit, and forum posts at the time of Cataclysm launching when SOD was being abandoned about how SOD died so Cataclysm could be middling or meh. Being honest though, I don't blame Cataclysm for ushering in the quotation marks SOD Dark Ages, but merely as one of the many catalysts combining to make phase 3 what it was. Did Cataclysm take dev power? Yeah, probably. Did Cataclysm take dev priority? Probably, yeah. Did Cataclysm cause Sod Phase 4 to get delayed? The popular consensus is yes, but I don't think that's the case, being honest with everybody. Whatever Blizzard's upload cadence is, I don't think the devs get to decide when to launch Phase 4's release date. I think there's a lot of internal corporate metrics and like mannerisms that have to be decided to select the release date. And as a classic player, I will say, I am happy for all the players enjoying Cataclysm. It might not be my favorite version of the game, but if people are having fun and enjoying themselves, that's enough for me. Congratulations, and keep having fun. But since it's not Cataclysm's fault, what is the main reason, the biggest reason, the true culprit behind Phase 3 being Phase 3? It's the length. Phase 3 lasted way too long to be fun. How long should it have been? Well, it definitely shouldn't have been 13 weeks, I can say that much for sure. Phase 3 overstayed its welcome by about 5 weeks, if I'm being honest, give or take, but probably closer to 7 weeks would have been their sweet spot. So many little things fell through the cracks that just made Phase 3 feel mediocre at best and terrible at worst. Perhaps if we had known from the beginning Phase 3 was going to last this long, people would not have minded, maybe. But not knowing when we were going to leave the purgatory that was Phase 3 was just a bitter feeling, and made a lot of people just slowly keep on quitting and quitting until we are where we are now. From a high of 185,000 raiders down to a low of 37,000, which is a pretty abysmal drop-off rate if I don't lie. Like that's really goddamn bad. As Captain McMillan would say, 50,000 people used to live in this city. Now it's a ghost town. And whilst the player base will recover, especially once everyone gets to level 60 and gets to enjoy Molten Core and all those endgame activities. And honestly, being able to actually enjoy the endgame activities, because that seems to be one of the only parts of the game people seem to really be enjoying nowadays. WoW used to have 2 journeys. One was the leveling, one was the endgame. And nobody's really enjoying the first journey anymore. People are efficient, skipping quests, skipping grinds, why bother questing, dungeon grind this, incursion this. Do everything as fast as humanly possible to not enjoy the leveling journey anymore. And that kind of sucks if I'm not lying to people. Because that first part was Classic's appeal. The leveling journey died over a decade ago the first time, and then it died again a second time 5 years ago. Nonetheless, with Phase 4 seemingly fixing every single major problem with Phase 3, I'm excited to deep dive back into the Season of Discovery ecosystem once again with everybody else. Because at the end of the day, even if Phase 3 was bad, one bad phase will eventually be fixed. We knew it was going to get fixed eventually. Sometimes it takes a full expansion. Luckily in our case, it was only 13 weeks of depression. If you liked the video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. If you hated it, like and subscribe anyways. What do you have to lose? You're watching a World of Warcraft video. Thank you all. Ebonhard out.